This is a sort of a protest album in a lot of ways. And that's never terribly palatable, is it? As a thought, oh, so-and-so's just made a protest album. Oh, really? Oh, probably won't bother checking that out.
Hello and welcome to TheAIbumMan. Apologies for my absence for the past month, but here I am back in a new place, and you're going to start seeing videos maybe twice a week. So it's probably no more than that though. Anyhow, let's get into the crux of this review. This is F.E.A.R by Marillion, the new album from the Neo-prog legends, and their first album in about 3 years. Now, this was not an album I was really very excited for. Their last release, Sounds That Can't Be Made, was to me the epitome of what Marillion have now become as a band to which prog should not be attached to their genre, a band who makes albums that sound so very similar, lacking that energy and spark that made them so great. Whether with Fish or Hogarth, whether that be Misplaced Childhood or Brave, since Marbles, the Marillion I loved seems to have vanished. But with F.E.A.R, it seems as if they may have somehow rekindled the flame, recaptured that spark. F.E.A.R it's politically charged, it's a passionate affair, and while it does have some flaws, it is such a vast improvement over previous records. I mean, the first thing that I noticed when looking at the track list, I'm sure most Marillion fans did when looking at it, was how it's structured. It's in the structure of 3 main suites, and then after each suite you have this sort of shorter, unrelated song, well, generally speaking. And I will be treating these suites simply as one song, since that's how they're presented, and I will actually be going track by track through this album to see what was done well, what kind of missed the shark a bit, and overall why F.E.A.R is the most important Marillion album in a very long time. The first suite we have is the strikingly named Dorado, of course after the mythological South American city of gold. This is kind of, well, it's not a story in a traditional sense. It certainly seems to be from the perspective of just a standard, ordinary English person attempting to come to terms with the modern world and the storms that England finds itself about to brace, whether that be, as Hogarth describes, an ecological storm, a financial storm, a humanitarian storm, a feeling that a sort of watershed is coming. Now, especially in the light of the post-Brexit aftermath, there can be few more poignant and relevant themes to address than this in lyrics. And while the lyrics perhaps do oversimplify the climate of the modern world, sentiments like the war's all about money, they always were, the money's dressed up in religion, when it's not showing off, the money's hiding, perhaps the idea that money is absolutely 100% the only central factor is a bit overly simplistic, but at the end of the day, in a rock song, I don't expect a fully realised political treatise. What is overwhelmingly effective in this song is the music. Well, Marillion's last attempt at a politically charged song, Gaza, was to me such a tepid, bland affair that I find it almost unlistenable these days, and I'm sure many Marillion fans will violently disagree with me on that, but to me it's a song I really cannot stand. This song, in contrast, is brimming with life, passion and musicality from all of the members. Keyboardist Mark Kelly certainly dominates this song, and you could really say the album, this is a very Mark Kelly-centred album, as he provides the foreboding and dramatic atmosphere underpinning the song, which really is, the song itself appears to be the calm before the storm. But guitarist Steve Rothery also plays some cracking solos on this one. Honestly, this song's success, it really isn't due to any individual performance, while there are some standout ones here. It is because of the band coming together under Hogarth's voice. And the best example is part 4 of this suite called F.E.A.R. And this song builds and builds into one of the best crescendos I've heard in a long time from the band, as Hogarth wails, "You can't see into my head." And you really hang on to every word that he declares. It's an utterly brilliant song, and that is a rare thing for me to say about more recent Marillion albums. Living in Fear is up next with an almost anathema-like intro, a slight way, don't take my comparison too seriously, as the intro moves to a piano-led ballad. Thematically, Hogarth lets out his utopian aspirations, and while one could perhaps accuse such sentiments as being a little naive, you certainly can't accuse the chorus of, well, not being anthemic. The "a show of strength" or "we're not green, we're just pleasant" is blasted out of one of the most anthemic choruses I've heard from the band in a damn long time. I mean, I thought "Power" from Sounds That Can't Be Made was a fairly, pun intended I guess, powerful song. This one, I can imagine, would be tremendous live, and one that I think deserves to remain a staple for a while to come. The Leavers Suite is up next, and myself, and I certainly think many others when listening to this and not, having read about what the album's about or what the individual songs are about, etc., will have been under the impression initially that with the terms of the Leavers and the Remainers being sung by Hogarth, that this is some song about the Brexit referendum, which I don't think was much of an unfair assumption given how those terms have dominated the British political landscape over the past however many months. But what it's actually a reference to is basically about touring. Hogarth says that when you're a touring band, or even more so in a touring band's crew, you're hardly ever home. You wake up in a new city every day. So this is not half as political as the previous couple of tracks then. It's certainly a moment of respite before the politics begin again, which they surely do. Well, more than a moment. I mean, this is a 19-odd minute suite, and I believe the longest suite on the album. It's really just a look at the life of travel from kind of behind the scenes, the effect it has on personal relationships, the feeling of almost being a stranger in that sort of personal, intimate setting since you're away so very much. And I do find it a well-realised track. It's, to me, like some of maybe the gravitas of El Dorado. It's heartfelt, but in a different way, in a way I guess I can't relate to half as much as I can with El Dorado. And the instrumentation, it is perhaps not as cataclysmic in its crescendos as El Dorado was, but there's still some wonderful performances here. The standout has to be Steve Rothery in Part 4, The Jumble of Days. He has some of the best lead lines that I've heard him play in such a long time. His signature reverb-drenched guitar just cutting through Kelly's keys with beautiful flowing phrases. As I said, it doesn't quite strike me as hard as the previous couple of songs, but this is still really enjoyable. It managed to keep me engaged for all 19 minutes, and hell, that's far more than Gaza ever did. White Paper, coming in at 7.5 minutes, is certainly a longer intermediary song between suites, and this is this is not political. This is a wistful, bittersweet reflection on aging and, more importantly, coming to terms with that fact. Wanted to be passionate and rail against everything, but realising that sometimes it's better to just take a step back. The lyrics in particular of "I used to be centre stage, time I should act my age," seem very much to be talking about the ego clashes that were going on within the band during the tumultuous Sounds That Can't Be Made period, and the clashes, I think, particularly between Kelly and Hogarth, were really got it to a point where the band wasn't sure whether they're actually going to continue. But here they put these troubles, these disputes, these ego clashes aside, and this is a song that lyrically is very much reflected in the musical unity on display. One enjoyable song. It does do little to differentiate itself from the Marillion sound we've got from the last however many albums, certainly of Marlborough's type onwards, and a lot of the Hogarth era. It sounds very similar to anything they've done sonically over the last decade, but it is a refined example. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's just that one of the overall complaints I guess I do have with this album is that, especially coming at 68 minutes, which is quite long, maybe not for a Marillion album, but it's still quite long. It does at times fatigue me with the lack of musical variety. You could say, well, what, there's quieter songs, there's louder songs, that's musical variety. Yes, but most of them, if not all of them, do have very similar structures. With you have the moments of crescendo, you have the quieter sort of Kelly-driven piano parts. Hogarth sort of sincerely singing something, then more passionately going into it, and well, that's all well and good. Sometimes it can seem, like the structure's just too rigid, I guess. But really don't take this as such a huge criticism. I know some people will be inclined to start commenting, oh, well then you just clearly hate Marillion if you criticise that. No, I really don't. I do enjoy that sound. I just find that it can be a little fatiguing, and that Marillion may want to sometimes do something to maybe mix things up a bit. That's all I'm really suggesting. But regardless of that, White Paper's a fine song. We come to the New Kings, the final part of the album, and the one that I'm sure all of you will have heard already, though you probably heard the whole album. But this was released early to the pledges of the album on Pledge Music. And I heard part one of this as the first thing I heard from the album, and honestly it was one of the reasons I wasn't excited for the album at all. But the suite as a whole, before we get into that, I guess, is about how corporations and money have corrupted the system, corroded democracy, exploited capitalism, all those usual themes of big money, and etc., etc. The first part, though, I was not very impressed with the chorus of just, Hogarth sort of in almost a falsetto, going fuck everyone and run, with its subtle string arrangement. I found it to rather be a typification of that sort of meandering Marillion sound that I find they do time and time again. But in the context of a suite, I find it makes a lot more sense. And well, it's certainly not my favourite part of the suite. There are some wonderful moments here. But in particular, I have to say, part 2, Rush's Locked Door. That's a splendid display. It certainly follows on the musical themes and the strings from the first part, but builds to a far more satisfying conclusion as Hogarth sings, "We're too big to fall, we're too big to fail," and culminating in a wonderful Steve Rothery-led solo. Lyrically here, it's kind of interesting. Politically, there's parts I agree with, parts I don't. I mean, naturally, that's, fairly standard. I mean, part 3's I don't know if I can believe the news. They can do almost anything these days. They can do anything with computers these days. Almost seems to be echoing some form of, David Icke conspiracy that the news is, I don't know, almost like photoshopping, creating CGI things of events, and it seems plane crashes, particularly in part 3, and maybe not perhaps my cup of tea, but part 4's anti-nationalist, anti-patriotic sentiment is certainly something I can cut my teeth into as someone who is rather anti-patriot, to say the least, and certainly very globalist politically. The New Kings, then, it is my least favourite of the suites. I'm not gonna lie. That doesn't mean it's not a really strong suite, though. Again, this suite is so much better than anything we really have done still over probably the past 3 albums, I'm going to be honest. But I find by this point in the album that the constant structures, it's starting to wane a little bit. Finally, we get the very odd Tomorrow's New Country. This is a tiny song, 1 minute 47, and in some ways it's okay, so it's going to be like an epilogue. And kind of is, but then also it's thematically in keeping with the Levers suite, and you're like, why wasn't it just in the Levers suite? It feels odd after the New Kings, and just very tacked on. This one is one I really think they should have just either left on the cutting room floor or kept in with the Levers. I think the final part of the New Kings was a more effective finish to the album. Anyway, overall, Marillion really have, to me, delivered their best album in years. A great return to form for the Neo-prog legends. And while the album is not in any real sense progressive, i.e. it doesn't do anything to eschew really the standard Marillion convention or experiment with their sound, all it does is perhaps force that Marillion sound into suites, which we haven't seen from the band in a fair while. This is certainly the most refined, passionate and charged example of their music we've seen since Marbles. And yes, I've said before, I do feel it can kind of drag structurally at times, and that Marillion sound, because we've heard it in so many other albums before, and because they do keep that same, sonic, I guess you could call it consistency, it is slight criticism I'll bring up. Though the only reason I'm bringing that up and sort of emphasising that as a point is, aside from that, there isn't really that much to actually criticise on this album. For once, it's a Marillion album which has very few duds on it. It doesn't really have any tracks that I just want to go to sleep in, which is rather great. And yeah, sure, it's a gloomy, pessimistic affair, but as a piece of art reflecting our current world, I think it succeeds in capturing that. It's the most relevant Marillion album for a very long time. This is a 7.5 out of 10. It's a solid listen. Marillion fans should really, really be able to enjoy this. And, you know, for people who maybe don't know Marillion, and it's not necessarily what I'd recommend as an entry point, but for people who are familiar with the Neo-prog scene, with progressive rock, and with a bit of Marillion, this is certainly, if you want to see where Marillion are at nowadays, maybe you've been a bit disillusioned with the past few albums, jump into this one, because I think you'll find something pretty great to find in this. This has been TheAIbumMan. Thanks for watching, and long live rock and roll.